Hey everybody, Travis here in my new temple. As you can see, let me just get this adjusted here. This is a good backdrop for our study in Ezekiel chapter 40 to 42 today. Now, if you've already read these three chapters, you may be wondering what the heck is going on here. These are some of the most kind of obscure and boring books of or chapters of the Bible I've ever read. And you might be true, but I want you to hear me out for a second. So, let me just put this away. Ezekiel chapters 40 to 42 are the beginning of the climax of the whole book of Ezekiel. If you've read it, or if you haven't, Ezekiel basically has this vision that God gives him where he is transported out of his exile in Babylon back to Jerusalem. And what he sees is there's a man in bronze, kind of this angelic type figure, who gives him a tour of the temple that has been rebuilt. Now we have to understand that based on the description that Ezekiel gives us, he has been in exile for the last 25 years. He was a priest. He lived and worked and dwelled in the temple. It was his whole life. But now he has been removed and he's living in a strange and foreign land. And the temple that he used to love and work in and worship God in has been completely destroyed, burned down to the ground, brick by brick. And now he gets this vision by God where he's getting this tour of a new temple, a temple that's completely rebuilt. And the angel goes around with this sort of measuring stick, and he measures all the different parts of the temple and says, it's this long, this part's this long, and I measured this wall, and it's this long, and here's the door, and it's this long. And it's this kind of long description about the architecture of this new temple, which if you're into sort of measuring and architecture and design, you might be into these three chapters, but for the rest of us, we might struggle. But I want you to hear me out. As I said, these are some of the greatest chapters of the book of Ezekiel. So if we remember, just from a few weeks ago, we finally worked our way up to out of judgment and out of despair where God's people are facing God's wrath for their disobedience. And in chapter 37, God says, you were dead, you were like dry bones, but I'm going to breathe my breath into you and you're going to come back to life again. And then in chapters 38 and 39, we have this kind of climax of kind of what seems to be the day of the Lord, the end times, where all these foreign nations are going to come and try to destroy God's people one final time, but just with a word, boom, they're gone, and now the people are living in peace. And now we are transported to this tour of this new temple. And I really love how this gets described. And if you are paying attention closely, which an ancient Jewish listener would, you'd understand exactly the significance of what's going on here. So in the description of when this vision is taking place, it happens to be in the year of Jubilee. The year of Jubilee, if you've read through the law books before, was this time after 49 years where all debts would be forgiven, all slaves would be set free, the land was allowed to rest, and basically is this year of celebration of everyone sort of everything turning back to normal, to good. And so if you're in debt, you're no longer in debt. If you're a slave, you're no longer a slave. Everything goes back to its right and proper place. The land rests and the people rejoice. And so it's a significant event in the Jewish calendar. And so when's this vision happening? Well, just in the months prior to when this Jubilee year was supposed to start. And so Ezekiel has this vision, and he says, just around the corner is going to be the new temple. Our old temple was torn down, destroyed, completely obliterated, but now Jubilee is coming. And in this new time, the temple is going to be rebuilt, and it's going to be bigger and better than it ever was before. I love this from the NIV application commentary on the book of Ezekiel. It says this as well, that it was on this day that Ezekiel saw visions of God where he was taken to a high mountain in the land of Israel. This journey to the high mountain has several precursors in Israelite history. It is equivalent to Moses' ascent up Mount Sinai to receive the law of God. Indeed, Ezekiel is the only person in the Old Testament, apart from Moses, who imparts God's legislation to people. And while Moses is up on the mountain, what does he get? He gets given the architecture of what the tabernacle is going to look like before he moves back down. And then there's this celebration of God's presence being with his people. And this is exactly a hyperlink to that story, that now Ezekiel is having the same vision of the heavenly architecture of what this is. And this is this culmination of God being back with his people. You may remember just at the beginning of Ezekiel, we had a similar vision where he gets transported to the temple, but that time the temple was being destroyed and God's presence was leaving the temple. But now here his presence is to stay. In the way that the temple is designed, no one's going to be able to get out and no one's going to be able to shove God out, because it's this secure, safe structure where God will dwell with his people and his people will dwell with God once again. And the thing about this is that we know that this is a heavenly vision. Why? Because the temple was rebuilt. It wasn't rebuilt to these specifications at all. And again, that temple was destroyed in 70 AD. But this temple is much bigger than that one. And this one is sort of the culmination, as I said. If we have the revival of people in chapters 37, chapters 38 and 39 are kind of like the final days, the end times, where everyone's going to try to destroy God's people, but they fail. Now we have a vision of the new heaven, where the temple is completely restored, and this beautiful big structure where everyone can come and dwell and worship God again. If you're curious, here is a picture of what that temple looks like. It might be easier to follow that way. Kind of gives you the basic design. But the premise of it, and we'll talk about this in later chapters because this vision continues, but we are meant to draw our minds to, Ezekiel is like this new Moses figure, receiving on the eve of Jubilee, when everything's being made right again, this vision that he's to give to God's people, saying this is what it's going to be like. God is going to dwell with us again. We're going to be his people again, and nothing is going to take that away. Isn't that amazing? So in the midst of all the measurements and details and the walls and the sanctuary and the altar and all of these descriptions that we might get lost in, we should remember that this is actually this beautiful pinnacle of the book of Ezekiel. That after this long sort of judgment and warning and destruction and defeat, we get these promises of renewal, and now this is the vision for the future. This is the hope that we have, that everything will be made right again, we will be restored, and God will be our God once again. So I'll leave that with you to ponder, and I'll see you around next week. Bye.